He got lost after the storm and followed the sound of rushing water through the forest. There, above the raging river, stood an old wooden house balanced on tall stilts, unmoving, yet alive. The man and his loyal dog stepped onto the creaking bridge, not knowing they were about to uncover a secret older than the river itself. Inside waited an old carpenter whose silence hid a story of love, loss, and a miracle that even time couldn't drown. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching this story from, because some storms don't destroy us, they lead us to faith. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in silver curtains over the dark ridges of Cascade Valley, turning the forest paths into veins of moving mud. The air smelled of pine sap, wet earth, and electricity, the kind that stays after a storm has already done its worst. Elias Ward tightened the hood of his jacket and pressed on, one hand gripping his walking pole, the other clutching the frayed map that had begun to dissolve in the rain. He was 41, tall, lean, with a face shaped by years of quiet endurance. His brown hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and a short beard shadowed his jaw, giving him the look of someone who had spent more time in the wild than among people. Once, in another life, he had been an architect in Seattle, a man who believed in straight lines, stability, and control. But control was a fragile illusion. His wife Claire had died of cancer 3 winters ago, leaving behind an apartment that smelled of her perfume and a man who could no longer bear walls that didn't breathe. Beside him trotted Ranger, a 7-year-old German shepherd with black and silver fur, strong shoulders, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Ranger had been trained for search and rescue before Elias adopted him, and there was something almost human in the way he scanned the surroundings, ears twitching, muscles alert. The dog had followed Elias through deserts, mountains, and ruined industrial towns, as if understanding that his master was looking for something that couldn't be drawn on paper. Not a house, but a reason. The storm had scattered their path somewhere beyond the old logging road. The GPS blinked twice and died, soaked by rain. Elias exhaled slowly, forcing calm into his voice. "Easy, boy. We'll find shelter soon." Ranger responded with a low bark and kept walking, his tail moving like a metronome of faith. Thunder rolled through the valley, echoing between cliffs. Each step squelched in the mud. Time lost its edges. Only the sound of rain remained, steady and endless. When Elias stopped to rest near a fallen cedar, he noticed faint ripples of water moving downslope, the rhythm of a stream, maybe a river. He remembered an old rule from his hiking days: follow the water. Water leads to life. Adjusting his backpack, he began the descent, his boots sliding on slick moss. Ranger moved ahead, nose to the ground, guiding as if he had walked this way before. The trees grew denser, their trunks black with moisture, their branches heavy with dripping needles. The world narrowed to breath, heartbeat, and rain. At last, a sound cut through the storm, deeper than thunder, steadier than the wind, the rush of a large river. Elias followed it until the forest opened abruptly onto a slope that fell toward a wide, furious current. Stillwater Creek, he thought, though there was nothing still about it. The river glimmered under the dying light, twisting like a dark serpent through the valley, and then he saw it, a structure half hidden by mist, standing above the river on tall wooden stilts. It looked impossible. A cabin suspended between water and air, smoke rising from its crooked chimney as if it had refused to surrender to time or storm. Ranger barked once, sharp and urgent. "I see it," Elias murmured, heart thudding. He crossed the slope carefully, grabbing roots and stones to keep from sliding. The closer he came, the stranger the cabin seemed, its timbers dark but intact, the windows glowing faintly with the light of a fire. A narrow bridge of old planks stretched from the bank to the door. Each step creaked under his weight. Ranger hesitated, sniffed the air, then trotted across first, tail stiff, head low. When they reached the door, Elias hesitated. Civilization, after days of silence, felt almost foreign. He raised his hand and knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. A man stood framed by the firelight. Thin, tall, his shoulders stooped from years of work. His hair was white as ash, his beard trimmed close to his jaw. His eyes were the most striking thing, a pale gray that seemed to hold the reflection of the river itself, both calm and deep. "Evening," Elias said, his voice rough. "Sorry to intrude, The old man cut him off gently. "You'll catch your death standing out there. "Come in." His voice was low, firm, carrying the quiet authority of someone who rarely needed to repeat himself. Inside, the cabin was warm and alive with the scent of smoke, bread, and pine resin. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. The room was one large space, simple, but built with a craftsman's precision. Every joint and beam fit perfectly, no wasted lines, no pretense. Elias felt at once small and safe, as if the place itself had drawn breath to let him in. "Walter Harper," the old man said, motioning toward a chair near the fire. "This is my home. The river likes company now and then." "Elias Ward," he replied, lowering his pack. "And this is Ranger." Walter looked at the dog, who had already curled beside the fire, eyes half closed. "A fine animal," the old man said. "Knows when a house is alive." Elias smiled faintly. "Alive?" Walter stirred the fire with a poker. "You'll feel it soon enough." Steam rose from Elias's jacket as he sat. His hands trembled from cold and exhaustion, but beneath that was a deeper vibration, something that came from the floorboards themselves, a steady hum, faint but constant, like the echo of the river below. "You built this place yourself?" he asked. "Long time ago," Walter said. "After the war, me and my wife, God rest her, we wanted somewhere the noise couldn't reach." His face softened at the memory. "She said a house should listen more than it speaks. So we gave it ears, open beams, hollow floors, space for the wind to pass through." Elias traced his fingers along the edge of the table. The wood was smooth, oiled, cared for. "You were a carpenter?" "I was a soldier first," Walter answered. "Carpentry came after I realized how tired I was of breaking things." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the hiss of rain on the roof. Ranger's breathing blended with the rhythm of the river. Elias felt an unexpected calm spreading through him, the kind that came not from comfort but from belonging. It was as if the storm outside existed only to push him toward this place. Walter rose to pour tea from a kettle that had been hanging above the fire. "Drink. You look like a man who hasn't rested in a long time." Elias accepted the cup, its heat seeping into his hands. "I've been on the road for months," he said, "sketching, walking, trying to remember why I started building things in the first place." Walter studied him with quiet eyes. "Maybe you were never meant to stop." Elias looked toward the window. The river glimmered below, silver and restless. "I thought I'd find peace out here. Instead, I keep finding places that refuse to die." "That's the only kind worth finding," Walter replied. The fire popped. Outside, the wind eased for the first time in days. Elias leaned back, exhaustion pulling at his eyelids. Ranger stirred, ears twitching. From beneath the floor came a faint vibration, not the steady hum of the river this time, but something slower, heavier, almost like a heartbeat. Elias frowned, listening. Walter noticed. "You hear it, don't you?" Elias nodded. "What is it?" The old man smiled, eyes distant. "That's the part most folks don't believe, the river's heart. Or maybe the house's. Hard to tell where one ends and the other begins." Elias looked down at the floorboards again. The sound grew softer, fading into the rhythm of the rain. A chill ran through him, not fear, but the feeling of standing on the edge of something vast and unseen. Walter added another log to the fire, and the light flickered across his weathered face. "You can stay here tonight," he said quietly. "The storm isn't done with you yet." Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but returning. Elias glanced at Ranger, who had lifted his head, eyes fixed on the dark window. The dog gave a low growl, not of warning, but of recognition, as if he sensed something familiar in the approaching wind. Elias turned to the old man. "What do you mean? Not done with me yet?" Walter's lips curved in a faint, unreadable smile. "You'll see when the river speaks." And before Elias could ask more, a sudden gust rattled the shutters, and the lights flickered, plunging the cabin into brief darkness. The hum beneath the floor grew louder. Then, silence. Morning arrived pale and uncertain, a gray mist curling through the cracks of the shutters, as if the sky itself had forgotten how to wake. Elias Ward opened his eyes to the faint rhythm beneath the floor, the same pulse he had heard before the lights went out. The hum was softer now, patient, almost alive. Ranger lay curled beside his bedroll, his fur still damp, ears twitching at every distant murmur from the river. Elias sat up slowly, the stiffness in his shoulders reminding him how much of the night he'd spent half awake, listening. The fire had died down to glowing embers. The old man, Walter Harper, was already up, sitting by the table with a mug of steaming coffee. The morning light carved deep lines across his face, turning his eyes the color of weathered steel. Elias crossed the room quietly. "Did the storm pass?" he asked, voice low. Walter nodded without looking up. "Storms always pass. What they leave behind is the part that matters." Elias followed his gaze toward the floor, where the faint vibration still trembled through the planks. "You heard it again, didn't you?" Walter asked. "That sound." Elias hesitated. "I thought it was my imagination." "Imagination's just a place where truth hides when men forget how to listen," Walter said, sipping his coffee. "You'll get used to it. The house has a way of talking when it wants to." Elias studied the walls. Every beam had been cut and placed with purpose. The structure wasn't random. It was built to breathe, to shift with the air and the water. "You designed this to move," he murmured. Walter smiled faintly. "Move, bend, yield, but never break. You learn a few things when you've lived long enough to see what happens to those who fight the current." Ranger rose, stretched, and padded to the door. He let out a soft whine. "He wants out," Elias said. "He probably needs to see where we've ended up." Walter gestured toward the latch. "Go on, but stay close to the bridge. The river's temperamental this time of year." When Elias stepped outside, the air hit him with the smell of wet pine and cold stone. Mist rose from Stillwater Creek, curling like smoke around the stilts that held the house aloft. Ranger trotted ahead, nose to the planks, then stopped at the edge where the river churned. Elias followed and knelt, running his hand along one of the massive wooden supports. The beam was slick with moss but solid, as if it had grown straight out of the stone. Below, water struck the stilts with relentless force, but instead of resisting, they seemed to yield in return, flexing like living limbs. He could hear the hum more clearly now, not just through the floor, but through the air itself, a resonance that traveled from water to wood to bone. For a moment, Elias felt dizzy, overcome by the thought that he was standing on something that wasn't merely built, but born. Ranger barked sharply, breaking the trance. Elias looked down the river and saw a small figure approaching along the muddy trail. A woman, no older than 30, wearing a green rain jacket and a wool cap pulled low over auburn hair. She carried a metal lunch pail and a notebook tucked under one arm. When she reached them, her boots splattered with mud, she smiled, brisk and practical. "Morning," she said, her voice quick and clear. "You must be the hiker Mr. Harper mentioned." Her accent carried the local drawl of Northern Oregon. Elias stood, brushing off his hands. "Elias Ward. This is Ranger." The dog sniffed her glove, tail flicking once in approval. "Good manners," she said, amused. "I'm Clara Dunn. I bring supplies to the old man once a week. Oh, bread, medicine, sometimes gossip if he's willing to hear it." Clara was compact and freckled, with sharp green eyes that seemed to weigh everything she saw. She had the posture of someone used to carrying more than her share of burdens. Later, Elias would learn she worked at the ranger station 10 miles upriver, a job she'd taken after her brother drowned in a flood near this same valley 5 years earlier. It had hardened her, but not in a cruel way. Her kindness came wrapped in practicality. "You're lucky he opened the door," she said. "Walter doesn't take to strangers much these days." Inside, she set the pail on the table and unwrapped a loaf of dark bread. "I brought what I could before the road washed out. They're saying the dam project's starting again next month." Elias looked up. "Dam project?" Walter grunted. "They've been threatening that for years." Clara crossed her arms. "Not a threat anymore. County trucks came through the lower pass yesterday. Survey teams too. If they build that dam, this place will be under 30 feet of water." Elias felt the room tighten. He looked toward Walter, whose face betrayed no surprise. "You knew?" "I knew they'd try again," the old man said quietly. "Progress never forgets what it hasn't ruined." Elias turned to Clara. "Isn't there something you can do? Historical preservation, engineering review, anything?" She shrugged and eyes down. You can't preserve what isn't officially there. Walter never registered the property after his wife died. Legally, it's just public land now. Silence settled like dust. Outside, the river roared louder than before. Ranger lifted his head, growling low. Walter rose and poured another cup of coffee for Clara. "Let them build their dam," he said. "They'll learn soon enough that water keeps its own memory." Clara sighed, packing her notebook back into her bag. "You should at least consider moving, Walter. The spring floods are coming. You're not young anymore." Walter's smile was tired but kind. "I'm exactly as young as this house, Miss Dunn." She shook her head. "Then God help you both." When she left, the mist had thickened again, swallowing her. Silhouette by the time she reached the trees, Elias watched her go, the thought of drowning timbers heavy in his mind. "She's right," he said. "If that dam goes through, this whole valley will be gone." Walter poked at the fire, the sparks rising like small spirits. "Then maybe you were meant to come now, Mr. Ward. Maybe the house called you for a reason." Elias frowned. "Called me?" The old man nodded toward the floor. "That sound you hear, it doesn't speak to everyone. Some folks hear it and run. Some hear nothing at all. But you listened." Ranger pressed his muzzle to Elias's knee, as if confirming it. Elias stared down at the dog's amber eyes, seeing something steady and knowing there. "If this place really is alive," Elias said, "then maybe it can be saved." Walter smiled, a flicker of warmth in his weathered face. "You sound like my wife. She used to say the same thing." "What happened to her?" The question hung in the air. For a long time, Walter didn't answer. When he finally did, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "She went with the river. It took her one spring morning, 23 years ago. Never gave her back." The wind shifted. Outside, the hum beneath the house deepened, almost like a sigh. Elias felt the vibration climb up through his boots, settling in his chest. It wasn't frightening. It was mournful, familiar, as if the river itself remembered. Walter stood slowly, his joints creaking like the beams of the house. "You'll understand soon enough, Elias. This place doesn't hold people. It keeps them." That night, as rain returned in soft waves, Elias lay awake again, Ranger's breathing steady beside him. From below came the rhythmic murmur of the current, and woven through it, the faint echo of something else, a voice, too distant to name, but unmistakably human. He turned to the window. The water shimmered under a weak moon, and for a brief moment he thought he saw a figure standing at the far bank, a woman, hair trailing in the wind, watching the house with quiet sorrow. Then the mist swallowed her whole. The hum beneath the floor pulsed once more, steady, waiting. Elias whispered to himself, "Who are you?" The river did not answer. By dawn, the mist had burned away, revealing a valley washed clean by the night rain. The air smelled of wet cedar and smoke from Walter's morning fire. Elias Ward stood on the narrow bridge, watching the current twist beneath the stilts. Ranger paced beside him, ears flicking, every movement taut with awareness. The hum beneath the house was weaker today, as if the river itself were holding its breath. Inside, Walter Harper was repairing a split chair leg, his rough hands steady despite their age. His gray eyes, sharp even through the haze of smoke, followed Elias with quiet amusement. "You've been staring at that river since sunup," he said. "Expecting it to talk back?" Elias turned, rain jacket unzipped, his expression thoughtful. "Last night, I saw someone, or something, on the opposite bank." Walter's chisel stopped mid-cut. "You saw her." "Her?" "The river keeps what it loves," Walter said simply, then returned to his work. "Some folks say the dead don't leave. They just find new ways to stay." Elias wanted to press for more, but a sudden bark from Ranger drew his attention outside. The dog stood near the slope, tail stiff, hackles raised. Elias hurried over and saw a flash of orange through the trees. Survey flags. Thin wooden stakes, bright ribbons fluttering in the wind, marking the earth like scars. He pulled one out of the ground and read the black letters stenciled on its side. Oregon Water Commission, Zone B, Flood Boundary. "They've been here," Elias said when he came back inside, his voice low. "Surveyors." Clara was right. Walter didn't look up. "They come every few years, poke the ground, draw their lines, think they can tame what won't stay still." Elias placed the stake on the table. "This time, it's real." The dam will drown this entire valley. Walter finally met his eyes. You think I don't know that? But I'm too old to fight papers with papers. They've already signed the death warrant. Then let me fight for you, Elias said. His voice carried an urgency that surprised even himself. I'm an architect. I can prove this structure's stability, show them it's worth preserving. They'll have to listen. Walter's gaze softened, but there was sadness in it. Men like you build things to last forever. I used to believe that too, but forever isn't ours to own. Before Elias could reply, the door swung open. Clara Dunn stepped in. Hair damp from the drizzle, her green jacket streaked with mud. Morning, she said briskly, shaking off water. You might want to see this. She unfolded a set of printed maps from her bag and spread them across the table. The county posted new boundary lines yesterday. The Stillwater Flood Project just got final funding. Elias scanned the blueprints. The bold red line cut straight through the valley and directly beneath Walter's cabin. When do they start? He asked. 2 months, Clara said. Maybe less. They're sending heavy machinery once the ground dries. Walter leaned back, folding his arms. Well, that's that then. No, Elias said, sharper than he intended. That's not that. We can appeal. Submit an environmental report, a historical claim, something. You said this house was built after the war. That makes it over 70 years old. That's historical status. Clara frowned. That's only if there's proof. Property records, blueprints, something official. Walter chuckled without humor. Blueprints burned when my wife died. She built the fireplace herself. Never saw a reason to file papers for what was already ours. Ranger whined softly, circling near the door. Elias crouched to calm him, hand pressed to the dog's chest. Easy, boy. We'll figure this out. The dog's heart beat fast beneath his palm, steady but restless, like the hum under the floor. That afternoon, Elias began documenting everything. He sketched each beam, each joint, the way the stilts met the bedrock. Walter watched in silence, sometimes handing him tools, sometimes just staring toward the river as though speaking to someone unseen. When the light began to fade, Elias followed the narrow steps down to the waterline, Ranger at his heel. The current was calmer now, but the depth was impossible to judge. Elias knelt, touched the wood, and felt it vibrate faintly. Alive, enduring. He whispered, You've stood through storms, floods, decades. I won't let them bury you. Ranger barked once, a deep, affirming sound that echoed through the gorge. Then Elias noticed something half buried under the mud, a small metal tin wedged between 2 stones. He pried it loose. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of photographs and letters. The top photo showed Walter, decades younger, standing beside a smiling woman with dark curls. Behind them was the same cabin, its stilts newly built. Scrawled on the back were the words, "For as long as the water remembers." He carried the tin back inside. Walter stared at it for a long time before speaking. You found what she left. Your wife? Elias asked. Walter nodded. Martha. She was the one who dreamed this place into being, said the house and the river shared a soul. After she died, I swore I'd keep it standing as long as the water ran. His voice broke, barely audible. Now they want to stop the water. Clara, who had been quiet by the window, said softly, Then maybe we need to make people remember. Elias looked up. What do you mean? There's a journalist I know in Portland, she said. He covers environmental cases, human stories. If we can show him this place, what it means, maybe he'll listen. Walter gave a small, weary smile. A city man won't care about one old cabin. Then let him see it through my lens, Elias said. Through your story, Walter. Considered them both, then nodded once. Tomorrow morning, we'll show him what the river keeps. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, sketchbook open, drawing the house by lamplight. Ranger lay beside him, head resting on Elias's boot. Outside, moonlight turned the river silver. The hum beneath the floor was steady again, deeper now, like a voice rising from the depths. Elias whispered, If you can hear me, help me protect this place. The house creaked softly in reply, the sound almost like a sigh. He closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him under. But the dreams that came were sharp and strange. Martha Harper standing on the bridge, her dress fluttering like mist, whispering words he couldn't quite hear. Behind her, the river swelled, golden and violent, swallowing the valley whole. He woke before dawn to Ranger's low growl. The dog was standing near the door, fur bristled, staring at the floorboards. The hum was louder now, urgent, trembling. Elias reached for his coat, but before he could move, Walter's voice came from the shadows. "It's starting," the old man said. "Starting?" Elias asked. Walter's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "The river knows what's coming." A faint rumble rolled through the valley, distant, metallic, unnatural. Not thunder this time, but machines. Elias stepped onto the porch and saw the first flash of headlights far down the road, survey trucks crawling towards Stillwater Creek. The air grew heavy, the hum rising beneath his feet, the sound of water and heartbeat blending into one. Ranger stood at the edge of the bridge, teeth bared, staring into the fog. Somewhere in the depths below, something moved, and the river began to rise. The valley awoke beneath a gray sky, the kind that seemed to press its weight on the trees and water alike. Elias Ward stood on the porch, breath ghosting in the cold air, as the distant rumble of machinery rolled through the fog. Stillwater Creek, swollen from the recent rains, heaved and churned below the house. Each wave struck the stilts like a muted drumbeat. Ranger paced restlessly beside him, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the far bend of the river where the sound came from. Inside, Walter Harper sat at the table, polishing an old compass whose brass cover had dulled with age. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but from memory. He looked up when Elias entered. "You heard them?" the old man asked. Elias nodded. "They're closer than yesterday." Walter gave a short nod. "Then it's time we decide whether we stand or drift." Before Elias could answer, a knock came at the door, sharp, hurried. It was Clara Dunn, her cheeks flushed from the climb, her boots streaked with mud. She carried a messenger bag slung across one shoulder and her camera hanging from her neck. "They've started clearing the access road," she said without preamble. "By next week, the first dam supports go in." Elias pulled out a chair for her. "We don't have a week." "I know." She spread a stack of printed papers and photographs across the table. "I called the journalist, Tom Hensley. He's on his way from Portland. He wants to see the house himself, talk to Walter, document the story. If we can get enough public attention, maybe the commission will stall construction." Walter raised an eyebrow. "And if they don't?" Clara's eyes met his, steady and fierce. "Then we'll make sure the world knows what they're about to destroy." Ranger let out a low bark as if approving the plan. Elias crouched to rub the dog's neck. "You hear that, old boy? Looks like we're going to fight a dam with a camera." The three of them worked through the morning. Elias measured the structural points of the cabin again, noting the curvature of each stilt and the way the beams flexed with the river's rhythm. Clara photographed everything, the scars on the wood, the marks of hand-carved joints, the grain patterns that followed the same flow as the current below. Walter wrote out his memories in neat, slanted handwriting, occasionally stopping to sip from his mug or to stare at the portrait of Martha that hung above the hearth. By noon, the sound of trucks grew louder. A faint metallic clang echoed from the valley floor. Clara glanced toward the window. "They're coming closer." Elias's jaw tightened. "Let them. The more noise they make, the clearer our story becomes." Hours later, a gray pickup pulled up near the foot of the trail. A man stepped out, a tall figure in a dark jacket and a scarf tucked around his neck. His hair was silver, though his face was youthful in its intensity. "Tom Hensley," he called. "You must be the folks raising hell about a house on a river." "That's us," Clara said, leading him up the path. "Welcome to Stillwater." Tom was observant, his gaze sweeping over everything, the cliffs, the mist, the sound of water. "I'll admit," he said when he saw the cabin, "I wasn't expecting it to be this beautiful." He turned to Walter. "You built this?" Walter nodded. "With my wife. Every beam by hand." Tom smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure people remember it that way." They spent the rest of the day filming interviews. Walter's voice, though frail, carried the quiet conviction of a man who had already made peace with loss. He spoke of building the house with Martha, of learning to let the river teach him how to live. Elias explained the structure's unique engineering, how it used balance instead of resistance, a harmony that modern architects had forgotten. Clara narrated the timeline of the dam's expansion, her tone sharp but full of restrained anger. Ranger stayed close to Elias, occasionally glancing toward the river as though guarding it. By evening, clouds gathered again, dark and heavy. Tom packed his gear. "I'll send this footage to my editor tonight," he said. "If it airs, the pressure might be enough to force a review." Walter clasped his shoulder. "Thank you, son. Even if they don't listen, it's good to know someone still sees what's worth saving." Tom smiled. Sometimes seeing is the first step. He started down the trail, disappearing into the mist. As night fell, the valley sank into an uneasy silence. Elias sat on the porch, sketchbook open, tracing the outline of the house beneath the pale light of the lantern. The hum beneath the floor had returned, stronger, deeper. Ranger lay beside him, head lifted, ears pricked. "You hear it too, don't you?" Elias whispered. The dog's tail thumped once against the wood. Inside, Walter dozed by the fire, but Clara remained awake, sorting through her photographs. "He'll get the story out," she said softly. "He has to." Elias looked out at the water. "And if he doesn't? Then we do it ourselves." Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The storm was returning. But this time it wasn't only the sky that trembled, the river was rising fast, too fast for ordinary rain. Walter stirred suddenly, eyes wide. "It's the spillway," he said, voice tight. "They're testing the dam." Clara rushed to the door. "Without warning?" "They don't care," Walter said. "They think no one lives up here." The first surge hit a moment later, a deep, thunderous roar as the water level climbed. The stilts shuddered, not in weakness, but in defiance. Elias grabbed the support beam, feeling the vibration run through his bones. "She's holding," he said through clenched teeth. Walter was already moving, faster than his years should allow. He lifted a trapdoor near the hearth, revealing a narrow crawl space below the floor. "Help me reinforce the braces," he ordered. Elias and Clara followed, crawling into the tight space. The roar of the water was deafening now, echoing against the timbers. Ranger barked above them, refusing to leave the door. Elias wedged a beam against one of the main stilts. "If we can brace it, it'll survive the surge." "Do it!" Walter shouted over the din. Clara held the flashlight steady, face pale but determined. "It's like it's breathing," she said, staring at the walls. "The whole house, it's alive." When the worst of the current passed, they crawled back up, soaked and shaking. The cabin still stood, steady as stone. Walter fell to his knees, hand pressed to the floor. "You see?" he whispered. "She knows how to stand." Elias looked toward the river, chest heaving. The floodwaters glowed faintly in the moonlight, swirling with foam and debris. But through the chaos, the stilts stood firm, their shadows long and unbroken. Clara wiped her face. "I got it on film," she said. "Everything. If this doesn't prove the house can survive, nothing will." Elias nodded, exhaustion giving way to quiet triumph. "We'll send it to Tom tonight. They can't ignore this." But even as he said it, the hum beneath the floor changed. It wasn't the soft rhythm of before. It was faster, heavier, as though something deep below was stirring. Ranger began to bark again, his growl low and warning. Walter looked toward the river. His voice was almost reverent. "She's awake now." Elias frowned. "Who?" Walter turned to him, eyes shining in the firelight. "The river." Outside, the current surged once more, this time not from the dam but from within. The water rose higher, and the sound grew louder until it drowned out everything else. The lantern flickered. The floor trembled. And then, somewhere below, something vast exhaled. Dawn came slow to Stillwater Valley, draped in silver fog and silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world rinsed clean and trembling. The air carried the scent of wet earth and pine resin, of something ancient rising from the depths. Elias Ward stood barefoot on the veranda, his boots soaked from the night before, his heart still pounding from what he'd witnessed. The house had survived the flood, not by defying the river, but by yielding to it, moving in rhythm with every surge. Beneath his feet, the floor hummed faintly, no longer in warning, but in gratitude. Ranger sat beside him, head resting against his knee. His fur was still damp, but his eyes were bright, alert, as if he too understood that something extraordinary had happened. Across the river, morning light seeped through the mist, turning the water to liquid gold. For a moment, everything felt still, the kind of stillness that comes only after the world has proven itself unbreakable. Inside, Walter Harper was awake but weak. The old man sat by the hearth wrapped in a wool blanket, his weathered hands cupped around a mug of tea. His gray eyes flickered with the firelight, distant but peaceful. "She held," he said softly, his voice hoarse. The house held. Elias nodded, kneeling beside him. "She didn't just hold, Walter, she moved with it. Every beam, every brace. It's alive the way you said." Walter smiled faintly. "That's because she's more than timber and nails. She's memory. Martha used to say the river would remember anyone who loved it long enough." Clara Dunn entered then, hair loose from its braid, her camera slung around her shoulder. Mud streaked her pants, her face still pale from exhaustion, but her eyes shone with fierce energy. "I uploaded the footage," she said. "Tom's already spreading it through every channel he can. The story's gone viral. People are sharing it everywhere. The house that stood against the river, they're calling it." Elias turned toward her, disbelief mingled with hope. "They're watching?" "All of them," she said. "Architects, environmental groups, even the state paper. They're demanding a halt to the dam construction until a full review." Walter gave a low chuckle. Looks like the old place found its voice after all. But even as he said it, a shadow passed over his face. He coughed, a dry sound that cut through the quiet. Elias helped steady him. "You should rest." "I'm fine," Walter said, though his breath came unevenly. "I just need to see her one more time." Elias hesitated. "See who?" Walter's eyes softened. "Martha." Clara looked toward the window where the light was shifting, dancing across the river's surface. "She's here, isn't she?" Walter didn't answer. Instead, he pushed himself to his feet, slow but determined, and walked toward the porch. Elias moved to help him, but the old man waved him off. "I can make it," he murmured. Ranger followed close, tail low, sensing the change in the air. When Walter stepped outside, the mist parted as if making room for him. He stopped at the edge of the veranda, staring at the river below. "It's quieter," he said. "She's resting now." Elias stood beside him. "You mean the house?" Walter smiled. "No, the water." He turned to Elias, eyes gleaming with something beyond sight. "You'll take care of it, won't you?" "Of course," Elias said. Walter nodded slowly. "Good, because it'll take care of you, too." The wind rose, gentle at first, then stronger, carrying with it a faint whisper that seemed to come from the depths, the voice of running water shaped into words no human could fully understand. Walter closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. Elias listened. The sound was there, soft, melodic, almost human. It was the same rhythm he'd heard beneath the floor that first night, only now it carried a tenderness that felt like goodbye. When Walter opened his eyes again, they were calm, steady, and full of light. "She's calling," he said quietly, "and I've been waiting long enough." He stepped forward, not toward the water, but into it, or so it seemed. Elias blinked, and for a heartbeat, Walter's body shimmered like mist in sunlight. The air rippled, the hum deepened, and then he was gone. No splash, no sound, just the gentle folding of fog where he had stood. "Walter!" Clara cried, rushing forward, but Elias held her back. "Wait," he said, his voice breaking. They watched in silence as the river glowed faintly, the light deepening to gold, then fading to its natural blue-gray. Ranger whined softly, pressing against Elias's leg. "He's with her," Elias murmured. He went home. The rest of the day passed in a hush. The sun broke through by afternoon, scattering light over the valley. The water, once fierce, now ran calm, as though it too had released something it had been holding for years. Elias and Clara sat by the porch steps, watching the current carry fallen branches downstream. "I sent the last files to the preservation office," Clara said quietly. "They're granting temporary protection. Tom says a full investigation's underway. The dam's officially suspended." Elias exhaled, relief heavy and strange. He'd like that, he said. She nodded. You'll stay? For a while, Elias said. There's still work to finish. I think the house deserves it. He smiled faintly. And maybe I do too. That night, after Clara had left for the ranger station, Elias sat alone by the fire. Ranger lay nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. The cabin creaked softly, like a living creature settling into sleep. The hum beneath the floor had returned to its old rhythm, steady, patient, eternal. Elias opened his sketchbook. On the first page, he drew the house as it looked now, rooted and serene, framed by the river's curve. Beneath it, he wrote, "For as long as the water remembers." Outside, the moon rose, silvering the surface of the creek. Elias walked to the edge of the veranda, Ranger padding behind him. Across the water, for just an instant, he saw two figures standing side by side on the far bank, Walter and a woman with dark curls, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They looked back at the house, smiling. Then the fog rolled in again, and they vanished. Elias whispered into the night, "Rest easy, old man. We'll keep it standing." Ranger barked once, low and proud, the sound echoing through the quiet valley. When Elias turned back inside, the fire flickered in a long, slow breath. He could feel the warmth of it, the heartbeat of the house, the steady rhythm of something greater than loss, something that endured. Morning would come again, and with it, the noise of the world. But here, above the river, between memory and earth, a single house stood, alive, listening, unbroken. And beneath it all, the water remembered. There are moments in life when storms seem to take everything. The home you built, the people you loved, even the reason to keep walking. Yet somewhere beyond the noise, there is a quiet current, unseen but constant, carrying us back to grace. The story of Elias, Walter, and the house above the river isn't just about wood, water, or survival. It's about faith. The kind of faith that doesn't demand miracles, but becomes one through endurance, love, and mercy. Like the river, God moves in ways we cannot always understand. He bends us, tests us, and sometimes lets the flood rise, not to destroy, but to remind us that what's built with love cannot drown. The house still stands, not because it was strong, but because it learned to move with the storm, just as our hearts must learn to move with His will. So if you're watching this, take a moment to breathe, to remember that your story, no matter how broken, is still being written by hands far greater than your own. There are still miracles waiting beneath the waters of every struggle. Share this story with someone who needs hope tonight. Leave a comment about what you believe endures after the storms of life. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel for more tales of faith, resilience, and quiet miracles. May God bless you, guide you through every storm, and remind you, just like the river, that even when the world changes, His love always endures.